I thought I had raised my daughter to be honest and responsible. But when I discovered she had stolen my life savings to impress her in-laws, everything I believed about our bond was put to the test. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and hit like if you agree that some betrayals cut deeper than money. The evening air was heavy with tension as Emily's husband's family gathered in our living room, their polite smiles barely masking the undercurrent of judgment I could feel pressing down on me. I had spent the afternoon preparing the house, hoping to create an atmosphere warm enough to ease the sharp edges of their scrutiny, but it was all for naught. My heart was still pounding from the conversation Emily had just had with me in the kitchen, one that shattered the fragile peace I'd been clinging to. Emily stood there, her eyes downcast, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and shame. She'd just confessed something I never expected to hear: she had taken a large sum of money from my life savings without telling me. The very savings I'd painstakingly built up over the years, scraping together every extra penny to secure a safety net for the future. And she'd done it to impress her in-laws. I didn't know what else to do, Mom. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. They expect so much from me, and I thought if I could just show them I'm capable, that I can provide, maybe they'd finally accept me. I felt a stab of disbelief mixed with a deep, aching hurt. The family had only just arrived, their eyes flicking between us nervously, sensing the silent storm brewing behind closed doors. Emily's husband, Mark, sat stiffly on the couch, avoiding my gaze. I could see the discomfort etched into his features, but he said nothing. I forced myself to remain composed, swallowing the lump in my throat. Emily, I said quietly, you should have come to me. We could have figured something out together. Taking money without asking, it's not just a mistake. It's a betrayal. Her shoulders sagged, the weight of her guilt suddenly overwhelming. She wiped a tear from her cheek, then glanced toward the others, who pretended not to listen but were undoubtedly catching every word. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as the reality of the situation settled over us. I had always tried to be the kind of mother who could protect and support, but tonight, I felt anything but that. Instead, I was faced with the shocking truth that my own daughter had crossed a line I never thought she would. The in-laws were a constant presence in Emily's life lately, their expectations sharp and unyielding. I'd seen the way they looked at her, always measuring, always finding her wanting. Emily's efforts to fit into their world had become desperate, and I feared this confession was just the tip of the iceberg. As the evening wore on, the polite chatter resumed, but the atmosphere remained strained. I found myself sitting quietly, trying to process what Emily had told me. The money was more than just a sum, it was a symbol of trust, of the bond between mother and daughter. That trust felt fractured now, and I wasn't sure how to mend it. Emily's admission hung between us like a fragile thread, one that might snap under the weight of disappointment and anger. But beneath my feelings of betrayal was a deep well of concern. What had driven her to this? How had things come to this point where she felt stealing was the only way to earn acceptance? I watched her carefully as she tried to mask her remorse with forced smiles and polite conversation, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface. Emily was struggling, caught between the demands of her new family and the life she had left behind. Later, when the guests finally left and the house grew quiet, Emily and I sat across from each other again. I needed answers, but I also needed to understand the pain behind her actions. "Tell me everything, Emily," I said softly. "I want to know what's been happening, what's made you feel so trapped." She hesitated, then began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been hard, Mom. Mark's family, they have these expectations that I'm supposed to be perfect, to have everything together. They don't see me as I really am. I thought if I could just prove I'm strong, that I'm capable, maybe they'd stop looking at me like I'm not enough." Her words cut deep. I remembered the countless times Emily had come to me, tears in her eyes, talking about the pressure she felt to meet impossible standards. She had always been sensitive, eager to please, but this was different. The pressure wasn't just from her husband's family, it was eating away at her confidence, making her desperate. I reached out and took her hand, feeling the tremble in her fingers. "Emily, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're my daughter, and I love you for who you are, not for what you can give or how much money you might have. She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I just got so scared that if I didn't do this, I'd lose everything, my place in their family, Mark's respect. I thought if I showed I could handle things, they'd finally accept me. The vulnerability in her voice was raw and real. I understood, but that didn't erase the breach of trust. We'll find a way through this together, I said firmly. But you have to promise me something, no more secrets. We face these challenges as a family, not alone. Emily nodded, relief flooding her face. I promise. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't stop replaying the confession in my mind. The theft was a symptom of a deeper issue, one that threatened to unravel the delicate fabric of our family. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with tough conversations and hard decisions. But I also knew that if we didn't confront this now, if I didn't find a way to support Emily while holding her accountable, we risked losing something far more precious than money, the trust and love that had always been the foundation of our relationship. Tomorrow, I would begin to unravel the tangled web of expectations and pressures that had driven Emily to this point. But tonight, I simply held on to the hope that our bond was strong enough to survive this betrayal, and that, together, we could find a way back to each other. In the quiet days that followed Emily's confession, I found myself retracing every moment, every conversation, trying to piece together how things had spiraled so far out of control. The house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of secrets and unspoken fears. I couldn't shake the image of Emily sitting across from me that night, her eyes swollen from tears, her voice barely steady as she admitted to stealing from me. The shock had faded, replaced now by a gnawing need to understand what had driven her to such desperation. I remembered the subtle changes in Emily over the past several months, the way she withdrew after family dinners, her forced smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had become quieter, more tentative, as if she were constantly bracing herself for judgment. The pressure from her in-laws was no secret to me. They were a demanding lot, with sharp tongues and expectations that seemed impossible to meet. I had seen the way they scrutinized her, their eyes lingering on her clothes, her manners, her every word, always ready to find fault. Emily had tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I caught glimpses, snippets of conversations, the way her voice faltered when she talked about family gatherings, the nervous glances she shot at Mark's parents when they visited. They never outright said it, but their disdain was clear. Emily was never quite good enough, never quite the daughter-in-law they had hoped for. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the living room, my mind drifted back to a conversation we'd had not long before the theft was revealed. Emily had been unusually quiet over dinner, pushing her food around her plate without really eating. Later, in the privacy of the kitchen, she had confided in me. I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells, she had said, voice barely above a whisper. They expect me to be perfect, perfect wife, perfect hostess, perfect everything, and when I'm not, it's like I don't belong. I don't know how to make them see me, the real me. I had tried to comfort her then, telling her that she didn't need to change for anyone, that Mark loved her for who she was. But now I realized how isolated she must have felt, caught between her desire to be accepted and the unrelenting criticism she endured. There was also the subtle financial stress she had hinted at in those quiet moments. I recalled the night she stayed late after a family event, her hands trembling as she told me about the mounting bills and unexpected expenses. She had never asked for help directly, but the worry in her eyes spoke volumes. It became clear to me that Emily's theft was not a reckless act but a desperate attempt to grasp at something she thought would secure her place in a family where she felt perpetually on the outside. The money was meant to be a bridge, proof that she could provide, that she was capable, but instead, it had only deepened the divide between us. I thought about the conversations we'd had over the years, the moments when Emily had hinted at her struggles without fully revealing the extent of her pain. I realized how much she had been carrying alone, burdened by expectations that crushed her spirit and left her feeling invisible. The in-laws' constant demands had created a pressure cooker environment, pushing Emily to the brink. Their subtle criticisms weren't just about appearances or manners, they were about control and power, a way to keep her in line and remind her of her place. And Emily, desperate for approval, had tried to meet their impossible standards at any cost. I couldn't help but wonder if I had missed the signs, if I had been too caught up in my own life to see how deeply Emily was struggling. The guilt was heavy. As her mother, I should have been her refuge, her safe place. But somehow, the walls had closed in, and she had felt she had no choice but to act alone. In the solitude of those days, I began to piece together a pattern, a slow unraveling of Emily's confidence, a growing sense of isolation, and a mounting pressure that had turned into desperation. It was a painful realization, but one that gave me clarity. This wasn't just about stolen money, it was about a young woman desperate to be seen and accepted, caught in a web of expectations that threatened to consume her. I resolved to be more present, to break through the silence that had grown between us. Emily needed to know she wasn't alone, that she could lean on me without fear of judgment. But I also knew we had to confront the realities of the situation, the betrayal, the broken trust, and the difficult road to rebuilding both. That afternoon, I sat down with a notebook and started making a plan, not just to address the financial loss, but to support Emily emotionally. We needed to find ways to set boundaries with her in-laws, to protect her from their relentless scrutiny. More than that, I wanted to help her rebuild her self-esteem, to remind her that her worth wasn't tied to their approval or the money she could provide. I reached out to a few close friends who had faced similar family dynamics, seeking advice on how to navigate the delicate balance of supporting Emily while standing firm on the importance of honesty and trust. Their stories gave me hope, reminding me that families could heal, even after the deepest wounds. In the evenings, I made a point of spending time with Emily, encouraging open conversations about her feelings and fears. Slowly, she began to open up more, sharing the small victories and setbacks she experienced as she tried to assert herself with her in-laws. I listened without interruption, offering reassurance and strength where I could. One night, as we sat together on the couch, Emily confided, "I'm scared, Mom. I don't want to lose Mark or his family, but I'm so tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Her words echoed the very fears I had harbored silently. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but hearing her admit her vulnerability was a step toward healing. I took her hand and said, "You don't have to be perfect, Emily. You just have to be yourself. And I'll be here every step of the way." There was a flicker of relief in her eyes, a small light breaking through the shadows of doubt. It was a beginning, a fragile but vital start to rebuilding not just our relationship, but Emily's sense of self. As I reflected on the past weeks, I understood that this journey was about more than money or stolen savings. It was about recognizing the silent battles fought within families, the invisible pressures that shape our choices, and the courage it takes to ask for help. I vowed to stand by Emily, to help her navigate the tangled web of expectations and find her own voice. Together, we would face the challenges ahead, determined to heal the fractures and rebuild the trust that had been broken. The road would be long, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that we could find our way back to each other. The tension in the kitchen was almost palpable as I sat across from Emily, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on both of us. It was time to confront the truth fully, to peel back the layers of guilt, fear, and misunderstanding that had built up between us. I could see the vulnerability etched in her eyes, a mixture of shame and desperation that made my heart ache. "Emily," I began, my voice steady but gentle, "I need you to be honest with me. Tell me everything. Why did it come to this? Why did you feel that stealing from me was the only way?" She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. After a long pause, her voice cracked as she spoke. "I felt trapped, Mom. Like I was drowning in expectations I couldn't meet. Mark's family, they don't just criticize, they make me feel invisible, like I don't belong. I thought if I could just prove I was capable, maybe they'd see me differently." Her words spilled out in a torrent, raw and unfiltered. "I was scared they'd reject me completely. I thought if I could show them I could handle things, pay bills, manage the household, they might finally accept me as part of the family. But I didn't know how to ask for help, and I was too ashamed to admit I was struggling." I listened intently, the pieces falling into place with painful clarity. The pressure Emily had carried, the fear of losing her place in a family that seemed so critical, it had driven her to desperation. But the theft wasn't just about money, it was a cry for validation, a misguided attempt to hold on to something she feared slipping away. "Emily," I said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand, "I understand why you felt that way, but taking money without telling me, without asking, hurt me deeply. It's not just about the money, it's about trust. When you break that trust, it shakes the foundation of our relationship." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know, Mom. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just felt so alone. I didn't know how else to make them see me, to make Mark proud. I thought if I could fix things myself, maybe I could keep us all together." Her vulnerability laid bare the fragile state of our relationship. The betrayal was real, but so was her pain. It was a moment of reckoning for both of us, a chance to confront the damage and begin the difficult process of healing. "I want to help you, Emily," I said firmly. "But you have to promise me something, no more secrets. We face these challenges together. I can't help if you keep things hidden." She squeezed my hand, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I promise, Mom. No more secrets." The conversation shifted then, becoming more open, more honest. Emily shared the small, suffocating moments, the whispered criticisms from her in-laws, the nights she lay awake worrying about bills, the growing distance between her and Mark. She confessed how isolated she had felt, unable to reach out for fear of disappointing everyone. I asked about Mark, about how he fit into all this tension. Emily's voice faltered. "He wants to support me, but he's caught in the middle. His family is so controlling, and he doesn't always know how to stand up to them. Sometimes I think he's afraid of losing them, too." The complexity of their situation was clearer than ever. Emily wasn't just battling external pressures, she was navigating a delicate balance within her marriage, trying to hold everything together while losing herself in the process. We talked late into the night, the kitchen growing cold around us as we unpacked years of unspoken fears and unmet needs. I shared my own disappointments and hopes, reminding her that she was never alone, that I was here to support her no matter what. "I want to find a way through this," I said, "to rebuild what's been broken. But it will take time and honesty." Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm ready to try. I want to make things right, with you and with Mark. I want to be the wife and daughter you both deserve." Her words were a balm to my soul, but I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. Trust, once fractured, did not mend overnight. We would need patience, forgiveness, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. The next days were filled with difficult conversations, not just between Emily and me, but with Mark and, inevitably, with his family. Emily resolved to set boundaries, to speak up for herself even when it was hard. I stood by her, offering support and encouragement, reminding her of her strength. One afternoon, Emily confided in me about a particularly painful encounter with her mother-in-law, who had dismissed her efforts at managing the household as inadequate and amateurish. The words had cut deep, but Emily refused to let them define her. "I told her I wasn't going to live in fear of her judgment anymore," she said, a new resolve in her voice. It felt scary, but also freeing. I saw a transformation beginning, a tentative reclaiming of self-worth that had been buried under years of criticism and self-doubt. Yet, the reality of the stolen money lingered, casting a shadow over every step forward. Emily and I worked together to create a plan to repay the amount she had taken. It wasn't just about restoring the finances, it was about rebuilding the foundation of trust between us. We set small goals, budgeting carefully and finding ways for Emily to contribute without overwhelming herself. It was a slow process, sometimes frustrating, but necessary. Throughout it all, the emotional toll was evident. There were moments when Emily's resolve wavered, when the weight of expectations threatened to crush her again. I reminded her that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks were part of the journey. One evening, as we sat together reviewing the repayment plan, Emily reached out and took my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said quietly. "I don't know how I got here, but I want to be better, for you, for Mark, and for myself. Her sincerity touched me deeply. I realized then that this confrontation, painful as it was, had opened a door to something new, a chance to rebuild not just trust, but understanding and compassion. I told her, "We'll take it one day at a time. The important thing is that we're moving forward, together." As the weeks passed, our conversations grew less fraught, more hopeful. Emily began to share more openly about her struggles and victories, and I found myself learning as much from her as she did from me. But beneath the surface, I remained vigilant. The fragile peace we'd established could easily be shattered if we weren't careful. The stakes were high, not just for our relationship, but for the family we were trying to protect. Still, in that moment, sitting across from my daughter who was finally beginning to confront her mistakes and fears, I allowed myself to believe that healing was possible. That trust, though broken, could be mended with honesty and love. And that together, we might find a way back from the brink. In the days that followed our emotional confrontation, Emily and I began the slow, painstaking process of repairing what had been broken. The air between us, once thick with betrayal and silence, gradually cleared as we took deliberate steps toward rebuilding trust. It wasn't an easy path. There were moments when old wounds reopened and doubts crept in, but together, we faced each challenge head-on. The first practical step was addressing the financial breach. Emily and I sat down one afternoon with a calculator and a notepad, mapping out a realistic plan for her to repay the money she had taken from my savings. It wasn't about the amount alone, though it was significant, but about restoring the foundation of honesty between us. "I want to make this right, Mom," she said quietly, her eyes steady and sincere. "I know it will take time, but I'm committed." We agreed on a schedule that worked with her current income and expenses, factoring in the occasional unforeseen cost that always seemed to arise. To ease her burden, I offered to help with some bills temporarily, but she insisted on taking responsibility. "I need to do this myself," she said firmly. "It's part of earning back your trust." Watching her take ownership of the situation filled me with cautious hope. It was a sign of growth, a turning point in a story that had been fraught with pain and disappointment. Beyond the financial matters, we also turned our attention to setting boundaries with her in-laws. Emily had endured countless subtle barbs and criticisms, each chipping away at her self-esteem. I could see how exhausted she was from trying to meet their impossible standards. Together, we drafted a plan for her to assert herself more confidently, to say no when necessary, and to prioritize her own well-being without guilt. I encouraged her to communicate openly with Mark about how his family's behavior affected her, reminding him that their relationship should come first. One afternoon, Emily came to me with a small victory. "I told my mother-in-law that I wouldn't tolerate being spoken to that way anymore," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. It was scary, but also empowering. Her courage to stand up for herself was a crucial step in reclaiming her sense of self. I offered my unwavering support, reminding her that setting boundaries was an act of love, for herself and for those around her. As we navigated these challenges, I also sought guidance from close friends and financial advisors. Their experience and wisdom provided valuable perspective, helping me protect what remained of my savings and offering strategies for supporting Emily without enabling unhealthy patterns. One friend shared her own story of family struggles, emphasizing the importance of open communication and clear expectations. Another recommended a counselor who specialized in family dynamics, someone Emily could talk to confidentially. I gently suggested this to Emily, who hesitated at first but eventually agreed. "Maybe talking to someone outside the family will help me sort through all this," she admitted. It was a small but significant step toward healing. Our relationship, once strained and fragile, began to thaw. We spent more time together, sharing meals and conversations that didn't revolve around conflict or money. I made a point to listen deeply, to hear the fears and hopes beneath her words. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily opened up about her dreams, of finding balance, of feeling accepted, of building a life that wasn't defined by others' expectations. "I want to believe I can be enough just as I am," she said softly. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You are enough, Emily." And I'll be here to remind you of that whenever you forget. Our journey wasn't without setbacks. There were moments when Emily's resolve faltered, when the weight of guilt and shame threatened to pull her back into old patterns. During those times, I reminded her that forgiveness, both of herself and from me, was a process, not an event. I also made sure to protect my own emotional and financial well-being. I confided in a close friend about the ongoing struggles, gaining strength from her support. I learned to recognize the signs when I needed to step back and recharge so I could continue to be a steady presence for Emily. Gradually, the trust between us grew stronger, built on honesty, accountability, and a renewed commitment to each other. Emily began to rebuild her confidence, taking small steps to assert herself within her marriage and extended family. She set healthier boundaries, communicated more openly with Mark, and sought support when needed. One afternoon, she surprised me with a heartfelt note, thanking me for standing by her even when things were difficult. It was a reminder that love, unconditional and patient, could weather even the most painful storms. Though the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer defined us. Instead, they served as markers of a journey we had undertaken together, a journey toward healing, understanding, and growth. As I watched Emily regain her footing, I felt a quiet pride mixed with relief. We were far from perfect, but we were moving forward. And in that progress, there was hope. Each day, we continued to navigate the complexities of family pressures and personal struggles, learning to communicate with greater empathy and respect. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I believed we could face it, side by side. And so, with cautious optimism, we embraced the work of rebuilding, knowing that trust, once broken, could be restored through love, patience, and unwavering commitment. Months had passed since the night Emily had confessed to taking from my savings, and though the road had been rocky, I found myself reflecting on the painful lessons we'd both learned. Trust, once fractured, required more than words to heal. It demanded patience, understanding, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths head-on. Emily was no longer the woman who had hidden her struggles behind forced smiles and silent desperation. She had begun to reclaim her voice, setting boundaries with her in-laws and carving out a space where she could be herself without fear of judgment. I saw her confidence growing, not in grand gestures, but in small moments, standing up for herself during family gatherings, speaking openly with Mark about her needs, and seeking support when the pressure threatened to overwhelm. Watching her rebuild her sense of worth reminded me that the greatest inheritance isn't money or possessions, but the wisdom to recognize what truly matters: love, resilience, and the courage to change. Our relationship, once strained by betrayal and secrecy, had transformed into one of openness and mutual respect. The promise we made, to face challenges together, had become the foundation of our renewed bond. Emily no longer felt alone in the face of her fears, and I found strength in her determination to grow beyond past mistakes. There were still moments of doubt, times when the shadows of the past threatened to creep back in. But each time, we met those moments with honesty and compassion, reminding ourselves of how far we'd come. I remembered the early days, when I first discovered the theft and felt the sting of betrayal so sharply. It was a dark place, filled with disappointment and uncertainty. But from that darkness emerged a new understanding, a recognition that family is not defined by perfection, but by the willingness to forgive and support one another. Emily's journey also taught me about the pressures families can impose, often unknowingly, and the damage that can result when acceptance is conditional. I resolved to be more mindful of such dynamics in my own relationships, striving to create an environment where everyone feels valued for who they truly are. One afternoon, as Emily and I sat together over tea, she smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her face. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. "Even when I didn't believe in myself." Her words held a quiet power, a testament to the healing that had taken place. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the warmth of a bond reforged through trials and tenderness. "I've always believed in you, Emily," I replied. "And I always will. That's what family is." We spoke then of the future, not in vague terms, but with a newfound clarity. Emily wanted to pursue her passions, to build a life defined by authenticity rather than expectation. She was beginning to understand that her worth was not tied to approval or material success but to the person she was at her core. As for me, I realized that being a mother meant more than providing financial security, it meant offering unconditional love and guidance, especially when the path was uncertain. Our story was far from over. Challenges would come, as they always do, but we faced them together, armed with the hard-earned wisdom that comes from pain and perseverance. In the end, the greatest inheritance we could share wasn't the money Emily had once stolen, but the lessons we'd learned about trust, forgiveness, and the strength to rebuild. And as we moved forward, hand in hand, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it as a family, stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.